It began in silence. No grand announcement, no visible launch, just a set of quiet coordinates deep in the Gobi Desert. And something new pierced the edge of Earth's shadow, invisible to every satellite the West had watching. For 12 hours nothing registered, no alert, no anomaly. Then, signals changed, patterns broke. At a listening post in the Pacific, a technician stared at a screen that suddenly meant nothing. A sequence of data he couldn't decrypt, feeding from a source no one had authorized. Behind a reinforced door in Langley, the briefing was short. We lost the sky, the first quantum communications satellite, immune to interception, unbreakable by any known cryptographic method. It didn't just send messages, it rewrote the rules of who could speak and who could listen. And the most unsettling part? No one in Washington knew it had even happened, not until it was already working. This wasn't a show of force, it was a quiet erasure of dominance, a hand reshuffling the global deck while the other remained hidden. For nearly a century, the United States defined what power looked like: aircraft carriers, alliances, economic reach. But somewhere between semiconductors and satellites, that definition began to shift. Slowly, methodically, relentlessly. What if we missed the moment it happened? What if the shift wasn't a future possibility, but something already unfolding beneath our feet? Not with the thunder of war, but in the quiet spaces where data lives, decisions form, and nations tilt off balance. Is the world witnessing the fall of one empire and the rise of another? Or is it something even more complex, a realignment we can't yet see in full? But how did we get here? And what comes next may change everything you thought you knew. The end of the Cold War wasn't just the fall of a wall, it was the unsealing of a vacuum. One superpower collapsed, and in the West it was believed, perhaps naively, that history had reached its final chapter. Democracy won. Capitalism triumphed. The future, they thought, would be flat and peaceful. But far away from Washington think tanks and Davos summits, another vision was already taking root. In 1978, a quiet man with an engineer's logic and a strategist's patience stepped into power: Deng Xiaoping. While Western leaders gave speeches, Deng gave permission for farmers to sell their own crops, for factories to chase profit, for foreign capital to flow in. It wasn't loud, it wasn't ideological, it was a blueprint. In his own words, it doesn't matter if the cat is black or white, so long as it catches mice. China didn't declare its rise, it engineered it. Through the 80s and 90s, as the US expanded militarily and culturally, China expanded quietly. Economically. In 2001, the world changed again. China entered the World Trade Organization. Factories multiplied, cities exploded outward, American corporations flooded in, chasing the profits of cheap labor and endless markets. By 2005, nearly every product on US shelves bore the same label: Made in China. And yet, few in the West considered it a threat. After all, this was supposed to be the path to peace through profit. Globalization was the new religion, but while the US was offshoring, China was uploading. Not just goods, but knowledge, infrastructure, and influence. A quiet pivot began. From factories to innovation, from assembly lines to algorithms. Enter the next figure, Xi Jinping. A man not interested in catching up, but in overtaking. He didn't want to follow the Western model. He wanted to build a parallel system, one that could stand entirely on its own. No more dependency, no more playing by someone else's rules. And the West? It didn't adapt, it distracted itself, with wars, market crashes, and a deepening addiction to short-term thinking. Presidents came and went, each made bold promises, but the trajectory never changed. While China built high-speed rail, the US debated infrastructure bills. While China graduated engineers by the millions, America exported its manufacturing base. The gap wasn't just growing, it was calcifying. And in the shadows of that shift, new players emerged. Jack Ma, Ren Zhengfei, Elon Musk, visionaries, rivals, disruptors, each navigating the same tectonic currents, but with radically different maps. And in this new game of power, it wasn't tanks that won wars, it was data, code, infrastructure, chips. The question was no longer who had the biggest army, but who could control the systems everyone else depends on. Foundations were being laid, quietly, relentlessly, and very few were paying attention. By the late 2010s, the front lines of global power weren't marked by borders, but by bandwidth. One company stood at the center: Huawei. Built by a former army engineer, Huawei didn't just offer cheaper phones, it offered something far more valuable: the infrastructure of the future. 5G towers, fiber optic switches, cloud architecture. Wherever it moved, connectivity followed. And so did concern. In Washington, it sounded like a backdoor. In Beijing, it looked like a blueprint. By 2019, the US called it a threat. Sanctions followed, the ban hit hard. But instead of breaking, China recalibrated, and Huawei's founder, Ren Zhengfei, transformed, once the quiet engineer, now the nationalist symbol. The message was clear: we won't rely on American chips ever again. Behind the scenes, another company was gaining ground, not with cables or routers, but with algorithms. ByteDance. TikTok. In less than 5 years, a Chinese-owned app rewrote the global attention economy. Not just what people watched, but what they believed. For the first time, American youth spent more time on Chinese software than on any homegrown platform. The question shifted: what happens when your rival controls the platform and the data that flows through it? While Congress debated, China accelerated. Surveillance systems blanketed cities. Facial recognition became standard. Real-time citizen scoring systems tested quietly in dozens of provinces. A new architecture of control, made not with bullets, but with behavioral code. And in the background, the engine driving it all: AI. In 2022, the world discovered a staggering figure: 40% of all new AI patents came from China, no longer following the West, outpacing it. In response, the US scrambled. The CHIPS Act, $52 billion in subsidies, and industrial policy revival. But could it catch up? Could a fragmented democracy compete with a unified state-led system? Because this wasn't just a tech race. It was a race for the operating system of the 21st century. Whoever builds it sets the rules. If power once meant territory, now it means access. Access to information, to systems, to secrets. In 2015, something vanished inside the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. 21.5 million files. Gone. Not bank accounts, not emails, identities, security clearances, background checks, the digital fingerprints of America's entire national security apparatus, stolen. The OPM breach was a message. Not loud, but precise, surgical. The battlefield had moved to cyberspace. In 2020, it happened again. SolarWinds. A vulnerability planted quietly in software used by U.S. agencies and Fortune 500 firms. Months went by before anyone noticed. And by then, the doors had been wide open. But this isn't just about code, it's about control. Who sees what? Who knows what? Who shapes what you believe? TikTok, again, became the Flashpoint. Senators called it a Trojan horse. ByteDance denied everything, but in back rooms and war rooms the question grew louder. What if the next great war doesn't start with missiles, but with metadata? Then came the balloons, strange objects floating above Montana, speculation, panic, and the realization that espionage didn't look like it used to. It looked like satellites, backdoors, platforms, chips. It's not just about who has more weapons, it's who has more data. For China control and influence, for the US protect democracy. But beneath it all, something older stirred: fear. In the East, a fear of containment. In the West, a fear of being outpaced. As nationalism surged and paranoia spread, the invisible battlefield expanded. Power doesn't always arrive with tanks or missiles, sometimes it rides in shipping containers and spreadsheets. In 2013, Xi Jinping announced a vision, not for war but for connection. Roads, railways, ports, pipelines, a $1 trillion network stitching together 140 countries across Asia, Africa, and Europe. They called it the Belt and Road Initiative. China called it the future. While American diplomats delivered speeches, Chinese bankers delivered funding, quietly, strategically, building infrastructure in places the West had long ignored. And with every contract signed, China's influence deepened. But the reach of power isn't only physical, it's financial. The dollar has ruled for decades. From oil trades to sovereign debt, global commerce runs through it. But a new competitor has emerged, the digital yuan. Not just currency. Programmable money, trackable, controllable, borderless. It launched in pilot cities, then expanded to cross-border trade deals. And suddenly Beijing offered an alternative to SWIFT, with no strings from Washington. Behind the scenes, another battlefield formed. Rare earth metals, the lifeblood of every smartphone, EV battery and missile guidance system. 80% of global supply, controlled by China. And when tensions rose, shipments slowed. Meanwhile, the BRICS bloc expanded. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now with additions like Iran and Saudi Arabia, a trade alliance, a political bloc, a challenge to the G7. Then came the reveal, China now trades with more countries than the US. The world's loyalties were shifting. And at the center of it all, a man who wasn't elected by the world, but who was reshaping it, Xi Jinping, the architect of a parallel order, not made with bullets, but with banks, ports, and protocols. Across 110 miles of choppy sea lies an island of just 23 million people, and the most dangerous flashpoint of the 21st century, Taiwan. Beijing calls it a breakaway province. Washington calls it a partner in democracy. The island calls itself independent, but only one side threatens war. Every year the tension inches higher. Chinese jets pierce Taiwan's airspace. US warships move through the strait. On both sides, escalation, war games, rhetoric, threats, but behind the politics lies a hidden dependency. Every advanced chip on Earth, from iPhones to missiles, depends on one company. TSMC, located in Taiwan. If war breaks out, the global tech economy collapses. The Pentagon knows this. In 2023, it ran a simulation. Result, the US loses a war over Taiwan in 72 hours. No time to resupply, no time to negotiate, no second chances. So why hasn't the conflict begun? Because both sides fear the cost. And both know, once it starts, there's no turning back. For the West, it's about defending democracy. For China, it's about unifying the nation. But for the world, it's about survival. The wrong move could crash every server, stockpile, and supply chain on Earth. This is no longer Cold War, this is Code War. The tectonic plates of global power are shifting, and as they move, the world fractures into new alignments. In one path, the world splits cleanly in two, the US and its allies on one side, China and its sphere, BRICS, Belt and Road nations, authoritarian states, on the other. This isn't just political, it's digital. The internet itself may not survive intact. One side runs on encryption, freedom, decentralization, the other on surveillance, censorship, control, a splintered web, two realities. Meanwhile, beneath this split, another race accelerates, artificial intelligence. In China, AI is tightly interwoven with the state. It tracks, predicts, and controls. In the West, it stumbles through regulation, ethics, lawsuits, but evolves with freedom. A cold war of code, algorithms, and invisible arms. Economically, China edges forward. Projections from the World Bank show the nation could overtake the US in GDP by 2030, not through war, but by scale, trade, population, and ruthless efficiency. Expert voices chime in. A defense analyst warns of a conflict no army can win. An economist says, the era of Western dominance is ending quietly. A retired general, we've underestimated resolve before, we can't afford to do it again. But the question that remains isn't geopolitical, it's deeply human. Can the US evolve, or will it cling to a fading status? Can China lead, without the world fearing what that looks like? Because empires don't always fall with a bang. Sometimes, it's with a slow, silent shift. One few even notice, until it's already over. Maybe the question isn't if China replaces America, but if the world is ready for what that means. One superpower built the modern world, and now clings to its legacy. Another is building a future on its own terms. Neither path guarantees peace, but both demand something more than strength. They demand vision, resilience, and truth. This is no longer about governments or generals. It's about all of us. The apps we use, the products we buy, the stories we believe. Because we're not just witnessing history, we are living inside the shift. This is not the end, it's the edge of something new. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you think differently, let others know. Subscribe to join the conversation, because the next chapter is still unwritten. Your voice matters.